Welcome back to another video. This week I'm going to be talking all about a very funky lens called the Lensbaby Muse. If you're new here, my name is Hannah. I'm a travel and nature photographer. If you've been here before, welcome back. So what is this Lensbaby Muse lens? You can tell it looks a little different than anything that you've probably seen. So you've got this metal piece here, and then you've got this rubber bellows here, and then this top part is actually made of plastic, but the glass itself inside the lens is real glass. It's not a plastic lens. It's a tilt shift lens. So that means you are moving the bellows here from left to right. You're pulling it down and you're pulling it out to pull focus. And worth noting, there is no electronic communication between the lens and your camera. So everything is fully manual. And this lens comes with what's called aperture step-up rings. So without the aperture step-up rings, this lens sits at an f2. They attach on the inside of the lens here through magnets. I don't actually have those. So this lens was passed to me from my mom. I'm gonna put it down, and she didn't have the aperture step-up rings. So this lens sits at an f2, but the step-up rings, if you do get them, go from an f4 to an f22, and then without them, like I said, it sits at an f2. I'll pick her back up again. So you also might have noticed this thing here. This actually is an adapter. If I can detach it, there we go. So this is a Canon EF mount lens. My mom shot on Canon. I actually don't shoot on Canon. I shoot on Sony. So I needed something to communicate the difference here so that I could use it on my Sony lens, and that's where this adapter comes in. You can buy adapters for these lenses for about $50, I'd say. So it just was an easy fix for something more creative. Once I got the adapter, I was ready to shoot. So to test this lens out, I decided to go photograph some wildflowers. The hills here in Washington are blooming, and it is absolutely beautiful. And I figured it would create some really cool effects when it comes to wildflowers and just knowing the effects that this lens creates on images. So I was really looking forward to seeing what it could actually do out in the field. Feels very weird to be taking off my 20-40-70 G Master 2 lens by Sony. If you've been here for a while, you know that that lens is my baby. However, funnily enough, the lens I'm going to be using is called Lensbaby. Packing her up. Okay, so to pull, I'm out of breath. To pull focus, you basically need to pull back on this, looks like a slinky. You pull back on it and it will pull focus, and the only way you can tell that you're pulling focus is by looking through the EVF or your viewfinder. And so that's kind of what you'll see me do, is pull on this in order to pull focus. It's fully manual. Bring new meaning to manual focus. This lens creates effects like dreamlike blurring, glowing highlights, and subtle prismatic color distortions. So rather than it looking like a traditional digital photo, it actually looks more like a watercolor painting, which I love this unique look on these photos. With mine permanently sitting at an f2, pulling focus was especially tricky with landscapes. The shallow depth of field was tough to work with because there were so many different focus artifacts and edge blurring, and I just found it really hard to pull focus on wider scenes in comparison to those tighter shots. But like I said, the look is very dynamic, and you really can't compare it to any other sort of lens that's out there. Neither. So what I'm finding is on wider scenes, pulling focus on kind of like Like if you see this view here, we've got no specific subject, right? So it's just like a leading line, which is this trail. And what I'm finding is pulling focus on nothing is hard. So I'm curious to see if I go to pull focus on something that's a little bit closer, where the lens can kind of identify that there is a subject, and it's not just kind of like a canyon. Curious to see if the lens will pull focus easier in a situation like that in comparison to shooting wide open landscapes like this. Let's see. Oh, wow. Whew, that's lovely.
What?
So what I'm finding, well, I guess I should preface, I really like slowed shutter photos of a still scene. So that means slowing your shutter down and adding movement to your camera when you're taking the photo. So you have a wide open landscape, slow your shutter down, and you just kind of like move your camera to the left or right or up or down. And it creates this kind of watercolor painting effect that I really love. And this lens is kind of mimicking that in a way. So these photos look more like a watercolor painting than a digital photo. And I really like that. So there's definitely a bit of a learning curve with this. You can pull focus, like I said, by pushing it back, and also pull focus by pulling it forward. But you'll see me in these clips like fiddling with it because it depends on so many different factors, like how close you are to your subject, I feel like what the subject is, all sorts of different things. And so you pull focus by moving it out or pushing it back. When I first started using this lens, I thought you just pulled it back and it pulled focus. But the closer you are, the more you need to pull it out. Learning curve, you know? Oh, cool. Literally rotating the lens in every way possible. And also I have peaking turned on, which is helping because then I'm able to see what's more in, or what's in a crisper focus rather than just using my eye to judge focus. That's been helping a lot too. So much sagebrush. Peaking is helping so much. Closer to the subject, it feels a lot easier to pull focus. It's almost like a macro lens, which I need. Mountain biker. This is one of those perfect examples of what this lens is actually good for. You can see the colors are super vibrant, and around the flowers you get this kind of blown out, super blurry bokeh, and I just feel like it adds a bit of depth that wasn't already there within the scene. This lens is really cool for patterns. you'll get pieces of pattern in focus, but then other parts will be unfocused, which makes like that watercolory type of look that I was talking about earlier. Oh my god, you're so cool. It always takes me a little while to find my groove when I'm out photographing. I feel like I take a lot of really crappy photos until I get to the good stuff, until I start feeling creative. I need a bit of a warm up, and these Lupin are kind of the perfect example of that. I started to get really comfortable using this lens, so I was kind of getting lower and angling the camera up a bit, and the results were these photos. This subject isolation is where this lens really shines, and I felt like these Lupin angled up with a bit of other Lupin in the foreground really created that subject isolation I mentioned a second ago. As you know, I was shooting with an f2, and when you're shooting with an f2, pulling infinity focus is impossible. So I did take some landscape photos. Some of them I'm not super crazy about, but others I really did like. But I do think if I had the aperture step-up rings, it probably would have been a different story. I know I mentioned that pulling focus on wide open scenes when we're shooting, we'll say to infinity, was really hard because that lens was at an f2. And at an f2, those edge blurring effects are really prominent. So had I had the aperture step-up rings, I probably would have liked those landscape photos a little bit more, but these landscape photos are kind of an example of where that f2 kind of works. It's giving these really prismatic effects around the center where I pulled focus, and the rest is really blurry. It's blurry enough where you can still make out what you're actually looking at. But all in all, with a step-up ring, I think that deeper depth of field would have gone a long way with this lens in those edge blurring effects. So who is this lens good for? I would say this lens is good for anyone that's looking to be a little more spontaneous or different in their photography. So that's nature photographers trying to add a dreamscape type look on things like wildflowers, or something where you can have an isolated subject. So portraiture or wedding photography would be really great. It creates this dreamlike look that really is unmatched. And if you're looking to push the envelope a little bit with your photography, this lens is it. While Lensbaby doesn't make this lens new anymore, you can buy it used for $50 to $60. And if you're needing to buy an adapter, say you can only find a Canon EF mount and you need to buy an adapter, that's about $100. And to be honest, to differentiate your photography from other people's photography in a world where so much of it is the same, it's really priceless. And Lensbaby doesn't actually make the Lensbaby Muse anymore, but they do make what's called the Spark 2.0, and it creates a very similar edge blur effect on photos. And to be honest, the adapter game is strong these days. You can go on pretty much any used photography site, whether that's Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or other trusted sources for photography gear. And if you find a lens and it's not the mount that your camera is, you can probably buy an adapter for that. And honestly, it's really fun to create these unique looks that nobody else is creating themselves. Anyways, all of that to say is if you find a funky lens or you find something different, go for it and just try it out, because you never know what the end result is going to be. And honestly, now that I've shot with the Lensbaby Muse photography, I'm thinking, can I try video? We'll see. I'm gonna put it to the test. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.